Hello, everyone, and welcome to yet another episode of Paragliding Banter. Today, I have a special guest with me. He's my closest friend and flying buddy. We've been flying together for over 11 years. His name is Rohit Kawale. Rohit, welcome to this episode.
Hi, Sajid.
Hey, and
Thanks for having me today.
pleasure, man. Rohit Rohit is somewhere else, and we are recording this through the phone, so there might be slight change in sound. So just bear with us. Uh, Rohit is an extremely amazing paragliding pilot, and he's shown this right from the start when we used to learn together when we did our first P1 and P2. And he's the geek of our group. He's the one who always reads all the manuals. He's the one who knows all the details of the gliders and harnesses and rescues, and he's the person that we go to for any information that we need. So I'm very happy to have him on this episode, and I'm sure I'm going to have him on many more in the future because there's lots of topic that we want to discuss. So welcome once again, Rohit, and today I want to pick your brains on an important topic that most of the early flyers, the P3s and the P2s, when they come to fly, they always have this question on which harness we should choose, the open harness or the pod harness. And the second thing would be like why do we need a pod harness in the first place? So that's the topic we're going to discuss today. And I want to start off by asking you a question. Could you just tell our listeners how long you've been flying, what gliders are you flying right now, and what harnesses do you have?
Thanks, Sajid. First of all, thanks for your kind introduction. That was a bit generous. Okay. So I've been flying for about 11 years, as you said, and currently I'm flying my second ENC glider, a Volt 3 from Air Design, and I'm flying it with Delight 3 Super Pod harness.
All right. So how long have you had this pod harness? When did you switch from a sitting in harness to a pod harness?
I switched to my first pod harness about 2 years into my flying. After I have done my SIV with open harness, I have done my, of course, soaring, and I was reasonably good at thermaling. That's when I switched to pod. And when I switched again, it was a gradual move. At least what I was reading back then was this was a detachable pod, and back then it was said that you can fly it without the pod as an open to get used to for a while. But in reality, that didn't really work. The pod harnesses are meant to fly with the pod. So I would still say I switched bit early, unknowingly, than what I would have done knowing today.
Right. I was just going to say that, 2 years is a little bit early time because if, as you know, I didn't switch for a long time. I was very happy with the open harness because I enjoyed the Acrobat more than the Exhibit. And for me, the switch has come a little bit late. So I will share my experience also of the pod harness versus the open harness. But here's a question. What in your view is the main difference between a open harness and a pod harness?
Um, it's the right tool for the right job. So once you are well versed with your basic glider control, energy management, I mean, when we are flying an open harness, we are dealing with less variables. We are dealing with the pitch, which is the glider's front and back rocking,
Right.
or the roll, right?
Right.
But inherently, by design, you are always gonna, you know, be suspending right under the two risers because
Right.
of no extended legs. You won't have a yaw movement to deal with. So as
Right.
you're learning lesser equations to understand and accommodate while you're trying to do the other things, it's good. So when you can do all of these, the glider control, energy management, without even thinking, that becomes a muscle memory. I think it's a good time to think about pod. Now, I believe after flying This 11 years, of course, not a big deal compared to a lot of well experienced pilot. But I would say from the weekend warrior, or call it a guy with a family, job, kids, and can only fly typically a weekend. I think still with my experience, I believe the pod has an advantage in the fine thermaling or the fine nuances of mapping, because everything becomes more graceful. You have more control compared to the open heart a little bit more, but you have more leverage points to handle, to put your pressure on, to do the weight shifting, the subtle weight shifting. So there are more finer aspects that you can explore of turning and thermaling and keeping it smooth like a cat in the thermal, with the pod harness. That's my personal opinion.
So, what I understand from what you just said is that the open harness gives you, it's basic. You're always suspended between the lines, and there is less that you need to think of. But that open harness is needed till the time you really know how to thermal. You know that you are going to take off, and you're going to look for a thermal, and you're very confident that once you get even a little bit of a bubble, a little bit of the thermal at whatever level, you'll be able to smoothly uh, climb that. And once you're in your flying experience come to that level, it's time for you to think of a pod, because the rest, everything else for you has become easy, or rather muscle memory. But now you would like to do that thermaling job in a much more efficient way, and be quick and fast to climb, and basically optimize. Would that be right to say?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And we didn't touch upon one aspect of pod so far. I mean, we live in India, one of the hottest country that we fly in. The cold is not a problem for us, but when we fly in Beer, in Alps, in the high mountains, high altitude, pod also gives the warmth and the comfort. So that's another reason. One more reason that I can further add is having all the controls at your easy access. For example, the pods typically have extremely well integrated the dashboard in front. So all your equipment, everything can be neatly at a perfect angle mounted, or the bar, the speed bar can be precisely extended, ready to use in a fraction of a second, rather than fiddling, sometimes with the open harness, trying to grab it and then put it in your leg. I've seen that often, that happens. So all these aspects, if you consider, pod is then, as I said, the advanced or sophisticated tool for cross-country thermaling flying. But of course, you have to get your basics right, completely nail down the energy management, thermaling with the open harness.
Right. So here's the thing. When I used to see people with pod harness earlier on, I used to feel a little bit suffocated just to see that their legs are tucked inside, and I used to always feel like, in case I need to get my legs out, what do I do? And that was the time when I really didn't know much about pod harnesses. This is way back, but that's a same view a student or somebody who's just started flying and thermaling would feel. So, like you rightly said, it is got everything inside. Your speed bar is well laid out. You got your instruments in front of you, and if you're flying in Beer or the Alps, you're not going to feel cold. That's something that I've experienced. But what's really uh, different for me was the hang point all this time, when I was flying with the open harness, was the carabiners. I would turn my body, and that's exactly where I felt the turn. But with the pod harness, I'm flying the strike. I feel that, between my legs, that's where the attachment point is. So it's a slightly different feeling. Uh, I really, it's like, I'm sitting near the carabiners in an open harness, and I did initially. It took me some time to get used to it, because now I could feel everything at the in my butt and the movements, and I could use that to turn. But it gets takes a little bit of getting used to. What do you think?
Uh, I would just expand on it further. I mean, what you said is absolutely right, but let's take the pod itself is not one simple uh, thing that you can club together. There are pods of different kind available, right from the Delight, the one that I'm using, or some of the entry
Right.
level pods, which
Right.
are almost like open harness. They have a seat plate. It's a seat plate design, so you
Right.
pretty much get the same input. Your weight shift are still very effective when you do bump shifting. Uh, they work very well.
Right.
Say for the cold and other reasons, they have the pod in the front. Often you can adjust them all the way to have the pilot between the risers, if you like. I almost fly upright for safety reasons and other reasons. I don't always fly recline. Sometimes I do. But then that's the entry level pod. Then there are pods which doesn't have, they are like hammock style often. Sometimes the hammock style has a seat plate that makes it like a semi comfortable. Actually, Delight is a hammock with a seat plate. Then there are pure uh, hammock style harnesses which doesn't have any seat plate, or even a simulated seat plate, I would say. In that case, you're spot on. The way you turn is actually using your core muscles or your stomach muscles, and they can be a bit handful in case of a turbulence or a rowdy air. It can be a bit challenging to handle if you don't have the right level of experience. And then there are other level of completely supine. Those pods are designed to fly completely supine. They do very poorly if you try to sit upright. Often these are competition harnesses or some of the ultralight harnesses. They assume your geometry will be supine when you fly. Very aerodynamic, very efficient, but all the risks that we talked about, risk of getting twisted or not able to handle the turbulence effectively, gets extremely multiplied in case of a very supine position. So again, the pod is of a different kind. So when you choose one as your first pod, um, talk to your buddies, talk to your instructors. They can guide you to the first safer, smoother transition to the first pod, and then you can choose as you get more experience the one that you like.
Right. So, yes, those pods are the ones that we see in competition, and you see the fairings, and you see the airbags. So, yes, those will be, like you said, will be difficult in turbulent air, and you really need to know how to manage your wing in those ones. But uh, these pods, suppose a person is a pilot was wanting to move from a open harness to a pod harness. There is going to be a weight difference, right? I'm talking about the entry level. There is going to be the entry level ones. The pods are much lighter.
Not necessary, Sajid. There are lighter entry-level harnesses to quite heavy, rugged harnesses as well. So weight is really the function of kind of category the manufacturer is designing the harness in. You can get pretty much harnesses anywhere between 2 kilos to 5.5 kilos at the top end in the regular category. But all the comp harness, as you're probably thinking, are heavy, like 6.5 to all the way 8 to 9 at times. They can be very heavy
Yeah, the
harness.
comp
Very.
harnesses I've seen, and oh man, they are really heavy. The reason I asked that question was, suppose somebody's the newer pilots who want to move from open harness to a pod harness, and they are at the top end of their weight range on a wing. So moving to a pod harness will really not impact their weight range, right?
Need not. Unless, I don't recommend to go ultralight harnesses for beginners anyway. So if you stick to the regular material harness, that will be pretty much in line with what their open harness weight is.
And for protection, it's good to choose a pod harness that has bump air.
Um, that's always changing opinion, and this is ever changing, ever evolving area. Right when I bought my first open harness, airbags were like new with a excellent G rating, like a 19 or 20. I remember for my Altix 2
Right.
repair.
We both had that,
Um,
and that was
yeah,
very
we
bad.
both
Yeah.
had that. And I did some shitty landings back then, full on coming on my bum straight away, and it did work just fine.
Right.
But over the years, as I've realized that as you get more experience, you don't often fall on the bump because your flare gets better, your landing gets
Right.
better, but you're still going to have little incident here and there. And often those incidents are in the angle. You often fall sideways, or if you're like, let's say, crashing in the turn, uh, you stop falling vertically down as you get experience. In my mind,
Um, so
uh,
what you mean by fall is near the land as you land when you flare, you might not
yeah,
have a proper flare. That's what you mean by fall, right?
yeah, that's what I meant. I mean,
Okay.
you will nail your player over the time well. So uh, at that point, I prefer I wouldn't call rigid, I wouldn't call airbag or a foam. I would say rigid. Any rigid protection. Even these days, some of the inflatable airbag protections, they are rigid. They don't compress easily sideways as well. So any rigid protection starts working better in my mind as you get experience
Okay.
compared to the airbag, because in the sideways impact, airbags are almost.
Okay. Did we lose Rohit?
Yeah.
Rohit?
Can you hear me,
Sorry.
Sajid?
Yeah, we lost you for a bit. Sideways
Okay. Okay.
impact, you were saying.
Yeah, for the sideways impact, the airbag protection becomes quite useless because it loses its rigidity very quickly in a sideways impact. Compared to that, any rigid harness, be it a foam, be it these inflatable harnesses, or be it even these are new aero bean, nothing but like a bean bag stuffed
Right.
inside your protection.
Right.
Even that's like a rigid protection.
Right.
They work very well for the secondary impact. After, let's say, your first hit, you bounce and you hit again. They work very well. Or the sideways impact, it works very well. So for my personal use, I always prefer now a rigid protector.
Right. So the idea is that we should have our landings nailed down, right? We should not have bad landings. This is especially for the younger pilots. That's not what we intend over here. But once in a while, you're going to have that one particular landing where you miscalculate and you might have uh, a bum landing, and that's when whatever just Rohit just said comes into action. Right. Uh, here's a thing that I want to ask you. It's a very it's slightly departure from what we are talking in terms of function, but from the psychological aspect. Does having a pod harness make a pilot look like he is an XE pilot? I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why. Uh, a few years back, I was in the open harness and I had just got my Super Acro 4 harness. I was flying in Beer and I was flying the cross country wing with the open harness because I didn't want to carry, or maybe I didn't have a pod harness at that time. And while I was in the thermal, I usually would see a lot of other pilots who would want to join the thermal come and scream at me to move out, and they wanted to use that thermal. While I was identifying the thermal, these pilots would come from outside and just shout and just say, "Move out, move out." I wouldn't understand why would they behave this way. It later struck me that I was the only one who was flying with an open harness, and they assumed that I'm not good at thermaling, and they assume that because he doesn't have the right equipment, he doesn't he is not a cross country pilot. So what do you think on this? Do you think there's a perception like that, and that people would and pilots or younger pilots would change to a pod harness quicker than when they should because they want to look and feel like an XC pilot?
uh, I'm pretty sure there is certain truth in what you just said, Sajid. But that's human nature. You can't really avoid it. Uh, Everything you said is, I would say, almost truth. I have hardly seen any more regular cross-country pilots flying in non-pod. You hear any experts talking, people with a lot more experience and understanding than me. They keep talking about how pod harnesses are not right. There are so many risks. Some of the SIV instructors also, I have heard, refuse to take you on SIV training if you have hammock harness, for example.
Right.
So there are good reasons. But at the end of the day, still every pilot that I know who has been flying cross country is today flying with pod.
Right.
So I also want to take the taboo out of it. I want to say that, pod is great. Pod is great, and I love it. I'll not ever go back to open harness. But there is a time to do that switch, and I think we talked in the first part of the
That
discussion
that
today.
that's the point that I want to touch upon. Like, don't do it for the looks. Don't do it because you want to
Absolutely.
look like an XC pilot. Because there is a reason why the pod harness is designed in that way, and that's only when you nail your thermaling right, where it becomes second nature to you. You're not thinking about turns. You're not thinking about movement. What you're thinking about while you're thermaling is, where do I go next? Where is that wind? Where is the other gliders? Isn't that right?
Yeah. I would take it a little further, Sajid. What you
Okay.
said is thermaling, yes, energy management, number two.
Yes.
And to a certain point, I would even say SIV. I
Right.
mean, I'm a big fan of SIV, and I would say that you should have SIV done with your open harness at least once,
Right.
and you should do one with the pod the moment you got again opportunity. So
Right.
I wouldn't move to pod before I do SIV because first of all, the reactions in the dive in case of a collapse are very different and can be very dynamic because the pilot tends to stay still, trying to keep his inertia while the wing dives, versus the same setting in the open harnesses often takes the pilot with him. So it's
Right.
less chance of cravat or less chance of twist. I mean,
Right.
this I've said multiple times, but I can't, repeat that enough.
Right.
So when you go to pod, count that as one more SIV that you must do with the pod.
Right. That's a very good point. I think SIV is something that everyone has to do again and again. It really builds on your confidence, and it always gives you exactly what your wing is going to do along with your pod and or open harness, and it gives you a lot better understanding when things really happen in real life. So yeah, that's a very good point, Rohit. But yeah, there's an image thing that we should always watch out for, and I would suggest to the younger pilots that, like Rohit mentioned, do an SIV on open harness, get yourself a pod harness when you're ready, when you're happy with your thermaling, when you're confident about your thermaling, and then move on to a step-by-step process of getting a basic pod harness, get the feel of flying in it, and do an SIV, and then see how you progress with it. And I'm sure it'll be far more efficient flying, and you guys will love it. Super. That was a good chat, Rohit. Is there anything that you think we can add to help people make a decision on the open harness versus the pod harness?
Um, just a closing comment. Adjusting the open harnesses means just getting your angle of sliding in and at the time of landing, sliding out, comfortable. But adjusting a harness, the hammock harnesses or the pod harnesses, take quite a lot understanding of flying dynamics as well. Uh, I believe as simple as the shoulder strap adjustment matters. If you keep it very loose and so that it doesn't put pressure on your shoulder, great while flying. But when it comes to let's say a rapid dive after accelerated 70% collapse, you're gonna have a wing that is rapidly winding under you, and your inertia still preventing you to go with the wing. That's when the perfectly adjusted shoulder strap is loose enough to keep you in comfort, but still tight enough to take the pilot with the wing. Maybe a podcast not an easier way to explain that. Maybe over the video or something we can talk a little bit
Yeah,
more in detail.
yeah.
But
But I understand what
this
you're
is a very
saying.
important aspect,
Yeah.
adjusting your pod harness.
Yeah, so you should do a hang check before you fly. Spend some time in the hang check, make visualize and understand emergencies or situations that you might be and how you would feel in a pod harness before you fly. So that's a very good point. Awesome, Rohit. Thank you so much for joining us on Paragliding Banter. Uh, I'm sure you are going to uh, come back again, and I'm going to invite you. Obviously, I don't think you've got a choice in that. So,
Sure, sure. Look
yeah,
forward to
there's
it.
lots of
We love
topics to
talking
talk
flying,
about.
right?
Sorry.
We love talking flying all the time.
Yeah, we love talking flying, and when we are not flying, or while we are flying, we are talking too. So Rohit and and along with Karthik, we just did a good flight day before yesterday, and very happy with it. So uh, thanks, Rohit, and we'll discuss more topics in the new episodes that come up soon, and I'll connect with you then. Thank you so much for
Sure.
joining.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.